the outcomes are that at the end of the day, to what extent do you raise the likelihood or the probability that a customer is going to stay or buy more? And you can measure that difference in probability, and you can put a dollar value against that. And then you can add up your costs and say, are we getting our money's worth here?
Once again, welcome to the Digital Customer Experience Podcast with me, Alex Turkovich. So glad you could join us here today and every week as we explore how digital can help enhance the customer and employee experience. My goal is to share what my guests and I have learned over the years so that you can get the insights that you need to evolve your own digital programs. If you'd like more info, need to get in touch, or sign up for the weekly companion newsletter that has additional articles and resources in it, go to digitalcustomersuccess.com. For now, let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Digital CX Podcast, this show where we talk about all things digital in CX. My name is Alex Turkovich, and this is episode 87, where we have an amazing interview lined up with Ed Powers, who has been in and around CS for a long time, has consulted many leaders and organizations and businesses on how to successfully run and scale CS and all that good stuff. In this episode, we talk about things like availability bias and how the customer experience as we perceive it isn't always how our customers perceive it, and also just basics of understanding the why behind why customers make certain decisions and how that impacts digital and all that kind of stuff. So really fascinating conversation with someone who's been around the block a time or two. And I just realized I'm wearing my beanie. It's cold here, and I've been wearing a beanie all day. And as much as I like you, I didn't feel like fixing my hair. So you're getting this today. Anyway, please enjoy this conversation with Ed Powers, because I sure did. Well, look, Ed, welcome to the show. I'm so pleased we're on. I'm grateful that we actually met in person. You know, it's rare that I actually do one of these shows without having met the person in person before doing the show. But we met at Churn Zero, so that was a fun. Churn Zero in, I guess it's called. We met there and had a good time. But yeah, welcome to the show. So pleased to have you.
Great to be here, and thanks for the invitation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Do you, so I, obviously I did a little bit of LinkedIn stalking, and as you do, would love to get a little bit of your background, but you spent a pretty huge portion of your early career at HP. Was that your first kind of big boy gig, or did you do stuff before then?
No, that was my first big boy gig. I was fresh out of college and joined HP back in the day, 100 years ago, and I was in sales. I sold test equipment, HP's test and measurement organization, when it was all part of one company back then. So I had a territory in northern Illinois.
Wow. So you were on the ground selling this stuff on site, probably. Yeah,
for about 6 years. So
Bag
I did that,
in hand.
And then I did some marketing, field marketing, really enjoyed that. And then I got interested in quality and in operations. So then I wound up going into that too. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. So, I mean, since then, you've obviously been, over the last few years, like crazy focused on post-sale and customer success and all that kind of stuff. What is it about you and your persona and your psyche that draws you towards just CS or CX in general?
Well, it's interesting. I spent, of all things, 10 years in the luxury hospitality industry and doing some startups there. And I knew nothing about hospitality. I'm an engineer by training.
Yeah.
And so I wound up just by happenstance starting a business, a couple of businesses, and growing that. And what struck me, having completely shifted industries, is there are things to be learned from hospitality and technology. And it was quite a learning experience to understand when you're in the hospitality business, it's customer experience is not a thing; it is everything. Right? You have to do that well. There's just too many other options out there, too much competition, and you have to just deliver there. And very different from tech, where it's more of a nice to have. People rest on their their technology and the pricing, and they're try to compete on that aspect of it. And okay, we don't want to be jerks in our customer experience, and that is about as far as it goes. So
Yeah. Yeah.
when I came back into tech, I sought to maybe apply some of those lessons, and
Sure.
customer success seemed to be a really good place to do that.
It's interesting because I do feel like, and this has been a recurring theme on the show too, is like taking lessons from B2B, but in this case, luxury hospitality into, or I should say B2C into B2B. Like, there's so many things that are happening in the B2C arena that for some reason we're kind of afraid to go down that path in B2B, or it just, it hasn't, it maybe doesn't feel applicable to a lot of people, when in reality, there's a lot of things that B2C is doing that we should and could absolutely implement to, to help that customer experience. And in some cases are actually expected.
Exactly. And what strikes me about software is it's pretty insular as an industry. People
Yeah.
grow up and stay in software and don't have other industry perspectives, right? And what I've been doing, especially over the last 10 years or so, is applying lessons in radically different verticals into customer success. And people are like, where did you learn this? I said, there's a whole other world over there where this is being done, right?
Yeah.
And I'm always surprised that they're surprised.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, there's little things too, like what was it? I recently ordered a new pair of glasses because, glasses. And it was through Warby Parker, and they have a really seamless kind of experience between their stores, their website, their SMS, and all of that. Like, the status updates that you get when you place an order with them across all the platforms is super highly integrated, And those are the kinds of things that always impress me about B2C that have their stuff together. And you just don't really see that same level of, integration between customer systems in B2B as you do in B2C. It's just not a thing, really. There's a few that do it, but.
And there's so much you can learn from that, so many great examples. And what they do what they do at tremendous scale is what we're struggling to do in customer success.
Constantly. Yeah, exactly. Kind of a downer when you think about it. But the thing that I find fascinating about that is the crux of digital CS.
It is. Yeah.
It is what it is all about. And it's, a lot of people kind of pigeonhole digital CS into this bucket of, oh, you do email campaigns and, all this kind of stuff. But really what it is, it's the entirety of the digital experience and how it's integrated, and also how your humans are integrated into it. It's not just solely tech touch. So I guess where that leads me is the natural next question is something that I do ask, the majority of my guests who've been on the show, which is, what would be your kind of boilerplate elevator pitch of what digital CS is if somebody off the street were to ask you?
I would just say it's using electronic means to ensure customers realize the value they expected.
Yeah. Simple. Very simple. And you know what I like about that? It's wonderfully specific yet very ambiguous too, because
I've been accused of that a few times.
But I think that there is a validity to the ambiguity, because what one company or person does digitally is going to be completely different than what another company or does digitally. Like there's so many it depends moments when it comes to designing this stuff that you kind of have to be ambiguous.
Well said. Yeah, and it's the approach, and it's the method that's used to get there that makes all the difference. The devil's in the details, as they say. But if you approach it in a consistent way, that gets you home, but the path may be entirely yours.
Yeah, exactly. So the success element, so using technology to drive your customer success, which is great. I mean, ultimately you try to have those success outlined, like what does success mean in your particular area with your software and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately what we're driving to is, by driving value and by driving success, we're driving revenue retention and those kinds of things. As part of our prep, we talked a little bit about how CS can have a much more direct impact on revenue retention. And I think, first and foremost, I think it would be great to get your take and your input, because I know you have a lot to say about this, in terms of the impact that a CS org in general can have on NRR in a more, maybe more direct way, because I feel like a lot of us kind of look at it in a passive sort of way.
Yeah, and I guess what I would say is the magic all happens when you start asking a very simple question. It's why. Why are customers renewing? Why are other customers leaving? Why are some customers buying more? Why are some customers buying less? When you really understand why, then you understand what context customer success has and what you can contribute to it, right? So a lot of the work I do with clients is to go ask that question and to ask it in such a way that you really get the answer. A lot of times people will ask for churn reasons and they'll have a form or whatever, or they'll, it's secondhand and people will check a box.
Yeah.
But they don't really understand what's behind that. Why did you decide what you did? What led up to that? What were the drivers in that decision, right? So you ask a certain set of questions that really reveals why they made the decisions they did. And then, so with that context, then you can go quantify that, right? You're going to hear common themes if you talk to enough people. I just did this with a client a little while ago, where, you ask two sets of people, those that did renew and bought more and those that left. And what's striking is a lot of times they talk about the same reasons, right?
Yep.
One of them, they're staying because they got X, and the other folks left because they didn't get X. Well, guess what? X is a factor. It's a very important factor, right? So you can pretty quickly, if you interview customers, narrow down that list of real drivers in that decision, and then you can go quantify that. And when you do that, you collect that data, then very quickly you see a distribution where it's a Pareto distribution or power law distribution, where you have a small number of factors that explain the vast majority of the behaviors. And when you look at those factors, what you find is that there are certain things that customer success can do and influence, and there's a whole lot of things that you can't influence. For example, you don't set the price. You don't determine who's a good fit for your product. That's in sales and marketing. You can't change the product or the features, right? But things like, as we've all know and have talked about for years, didn't get enough value out of it, didn't get enough usage, and you can still quantify that. And if you can match that in terms of revenue, frequency, probability, now you can quantify what your contribution is, right? So then it's just a question of, well, how much impact do we make? And what does that look like? And can we, when we look at the operations of customer success compared to what the outcomes are, at the end of the day, to what extent do you raise the likelihood or the probability that a customer is going to stay or buy more? And you can measure that difference in probability, and you can put a dollar value against that. And then you can add up your costs and say, are we getting our money's worth here? And if you go through that exercise, surprise, surprise, just getting customers to that next level to increase those odds, usually more than pays for the whole function just by that itself.
A lot of people, when they ask me about the kinds of things that I will track in a digital program, I think there's like your classic CS, retention metrics and all that kind of stuff. But I'm also looking at marketing, metrics in terms of what campaigns are you running and are they effective, open rates, click-through rates, engagement rates, all that kind of stuff. But I think what you just hit on as well is kind of that magic third bucket, which is the attribution. Like which one of your actions in the digital realm, maybe campaigns and maybe whatever, but just in general, which of your CS motions and CS actions had direct attribution to revenue? That's notoriously difficult for a lot of people. It's elusive.
I mean, either you don't have the data and you need to go collect that data, or you have the data and you don't understand how to analyze the data, right?
Yeah.
This is a statistical argument, and if you have the data, you can show it very quickly with the right set of statistical tools. You can demonstrate that, and I do that all the time with my clients, is to show exactly what the difference in probabilities are.
Yeah.
And don't take it from me. This is out of your data, right?
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
and when you're working in the facts, people don't debate it so much.
Yep. Just as long as they trust the data, where it's coming from. Yeah.
Which is another whole can of worms.
Which is a whole nother can of worms. I take it you are a fan, from your earlier answer, that you're a fan of the exit interview in general, like a customer exit interview. Have you seen that implemented particularly well? And do you mind sharing some of that secret sauce?
I rarely see it done well by a company themselves. And the reason being is that the people that you typically ask to go collect that information, if it's the qualitative form of that, to actually talk to somebody, usually the people that do that have a lot of biases, and it's completely understandable, right? They tend to look at things from their own perspective. Having an outside person come in and ask that very, very much helps to eliminate some of that. You can be, tell me more about that and what happened and why did it happen? And, you ask a different set of questions than someone working for the company would. And the person you're interviewing is a little bit more comfortable because they know they're not going to offend anybody, right? They know that no one's going to take what they say in the wrong way. They can be completely candid and explain all of it to you and feel completely safe doing it, right? So almost always when I've done this, we surface things that people had no idea that was what was really going on, right? So I think in good companies, they have a healthy dose of outside people doing it for them, understanding that they have their own biases. And we all go through life with our blinders on. And one of the gifts we give each other is we say, hey, you got a blinder on that. And I had no idea,
Yeah, absolutely. I have yet, much like you, I've yet to see an internally run like exit interview process that A, persists and doesn't die quickly after it's launched, and B, is, to your point, that's successful. Because honestly, if I were to receive a call from a vendor that I had churned out of, I probably wouldn't really want to spend any significant amount of time on the phone.
Right. And it's a trick to get people, even as a third party, because there's kind of this window of opportunity. After that, they'll ignore you. When it's still fresh, they're willing to talk because they just made that decision and they want to share that, right? They're still processing it themselves.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
I think one thing that's very important as well, and I've seen this several times, is that you don't have to do this qualitative interviewing all the time, but you do need to do it frequently enough. One of the clients I work with, was absolutely sure. I know these customers. I've been in this space for 15 years. I know all about this. And I had to really, really push them and say, please, please, please let me go talk to your customers because I think we're missing something.
Yeah.
He finally relented. And then I went and talked to them, and huge surprises, right? I mean, his whole market had shifted and he wasn't even aware of it, right? They were selling to an entirely different segment that he was unaware of, which explained what he was seeing in terms of his churn behavior, right? And so you need to do this enough that you have that visibility frequently enough, because markets are always changing.
Yeah. This reminds me, I was advising a company not long ago that was really, really hesitant to launch like new digital outreach campaigns because they were afraid of rocking the boat. I don't think they had, and much like kind of you alluded to, there wasn't this culture of let's just go talk to our customers. It was just like, let's, wait till they reach out to support or something like that. But there was this massive hesitance to even like think about distributing, digital comms for this fear of the customer, responding. And I just thought that was it was so prevalent throughout that entire organization, that this kind of hesitancy to reach out, I've never really encountered anything quite like it. And so, there's a lot of kind of change management that has to go into those kinds of things as well, and to open yourself up, to that kind of feedback. And that kind of leads me to my next question, just around the customer experience in general, because one of the things as a CS leader that I like to do periodically is to insert myself into the customer experience and go secret shopping, if you will, in my own processes. And it's amazing what you uncover when you do that kind of stuff. But I was curious to get your sentiment on, or your take on that sort of thing, or how you typically advise your customers kind of stay connected to the customer and the customer experience.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it is so essential to, again, go back and talk to customers and ask the questions that you don't normally ask. There is Daniel Kahneman, the late Daniel Kahneman, a behavioral scientist. One of the things he labels this as, what you see is all there is. Reality is what that is. So what you see is all there is. And it's about availability bias. Whatever you can easily recall, whatever you can remember, defines your reality. And the problem when we think about our customer journey is we think about our customer journey from our own perspective, right? We talk about it because we know what this is. We see this all the time. We interact with these customers, and of course they follow our process. So we have therefore defined what their journey is. The problem is that's not the customer's journey. It's just your experience of what that is from your vantage point. Mm-hmm. And a lot of what I do, again, talking to clients, is to say, tell me the story. Tell me about the time, from the time when you purchased this product to when you said, aha, there's the value I was looking for. And just, describe that to me. What actually happened on your end? What were the things, what steps did you have to go through? What were the things that you were doing that maybe your vendor wasn't even aware you were having to do, right? Mm-hmm. And when you unpack that, you find all kinds of surprises that, there's certain things that were easy for them and quick and they loved it. And then there were other things that were a huge struggle. And then there were another whole set of things that they had no idea. And those kinds of opportunities, that's new products and services for them, right? There's an abundance of things that you can get from that will smooth that journey and make things faster, more effective. One thing we typically, for example, tend to overlook on the technology side is we're hyper-focused on the technology. We know how our tools work, and we know the data and how it all connects and integration, blah, 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 blah. We know how to run these projects. So we're extremely technology-focused. Mm-hmm. We know very little about the customer's process, what they have to change in their process, or their policies, or the behaviors of their users, right? When you change technology, by definition, you change the process and you change the people that are interacting with it. Mm-hmm. And we tend to forget about that, ignore it. Hey, that's the customer's problem. And yet there are so many things that we can do to make that easier and faster for them and more likely to get the results they're after. And if you never ask, you never know.
Yeah. Hey, I want to have a brief chat with you about this show. Did you know that roughly 60% of listeners aren't actually subscribed to the show on whatever platform they're listening to it on? Now, as you know, algorithms love likes, follows, subscribes, comments, all of that kind of stuff. So if you get value out of the content, you listen regularly, and you want to help others to discover the content as well, please go ahead and follow the show, leave a comment, leave a review. Anything that you want to do there really helps us to grow organically as a show. And while you're at it, go sign up for the companion newsletter that goes out every week at digitalcustomersuccess.com. Now, back to the show. That's so true. There's also this extension of being hyper-focused on the tech and the speeds and feeds and the how-tos that we miss a lot of times, which is that consultancy layer of, injecting what expertise you've gleaned from how your other customers are doing certain things and what processes that they've implemented. Mm-hmm. A lot of times I think we miss out on the opportunity for us to not just drive value through like the software, but drive value through advice and general guidance on how to do certain things in a way that, makes sense based on on what we've seen.
Right.
Yeah. And I think digitally, add to that, we miss out on doing that digitally a lot of times
Yeah.
because, you'll ideally, if you're operating in a data rich environment, you'll be able to see certain indicators out of your product when certain things are happening. And if you know a certain activity generally correlates with, an outcome that a certain customer is trying to achieve, or, an activity that usually leads a customer into a dark path, that's prime time for you to digitally intervene, either like in product or with an email, or just as an internal alert to say, hey, go check out Acme. They're about to screw themselves.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Kind of speaking of digital motions and whatnot, I'd be curious to it's always great speaking with people who are active in the consulting world, because you see a lot of different things and you see a lot of different CS orgs like operate in different ways. Are there cool like digital motions that you've encountered, in the past few years that you feel like, are things that other people could kind of pick up on and track down, or things you've seen in the wild that are just like really cool?
Yeah, and I can't get too specific because every
Of
client I
course.
work with is under NDA, so I can't really name names.
Of
But
course.
I can say that yes, there's a lot of the work I've been doing the last couple of years, in particular, probably not surprising to anybody, is all about that. Is how do we do this at scale? How do we drive out costs? A lot of times when I work with clients, the tiering isn't really clean. In other words, understanding the financial trade-offs. Not every customer is the same. You have some that spend a whole lot of money with you. Again, back to the power law distribution, you have a small number of accounts that make up a monster part of your revenue, and you typically have a long tail of a lot of accounts that make up very little.
Yeah.
And where you draw those lines from a financial perspective really, really is important, right? It's not only the past performance, but what is the future potential? It's the white space too. But how you allocate those accounts and how you understand the investment and return of those tiers is critically important, because that gives you the guard bands or the guidelines for what you're going to do in each one of those groups of customers, right?
Right.
And a lot of times people they have no concept of, they've never done that analysis. And where you draw the line really matters. So
Yeah.
that's part of it. I will say, and we started talking about this, is that in the B2C space, if you really want to see how it's done well, holy cow, look at what's happening in B2C. And the problem I've seen in software is that it's way too complicated, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and it's made to be way too complicated. It's very, very hard to make things simple. It's really hard to do that. You have to invest a lot of time and a lot of effort, and you have to do something that's very unnatural, which is to overcome what's called additive bias, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that we all do as humans is we are much more likely to add something to make a solution better than to take something away.
Yeah.
And they've actually proven this. A fascinating study in behavioral science is that is one of the blinders that people have in product and in engineering, is that we'll just add more and we'll add more and we'll add more. And then you have this huge feature bloat going on, way too complicated. People can't deal with it. It's way overpriced for maybe the majority of the use cases that people really need it for. Like Excel, most people only use about 20 to 30 features.
That's right.
It's got 450 features in it, right? I mean, why? Right? So there's this in software in particular. It's easy to add stuff, so people are always adding stuff. They're not making it simpler. They're not making it better that way. So contrast that with the B2C space, where it's a very simple product to begin with most times, but they go above and beyond to make it even simpler. Right? Apple's a great example. Peloton blows me away. Peloton, I know they've had their ups and downs.
Sure.
But you want to look at a company that's got that dialed in.
Yeah.
Look at Peloton. Holy cow, right? From a digital approach to renewals to keeping customers in the fold, all the stuff that they do in community and their athletes. And I mean, it goes on and on and on. And if anybody has really cracked that code, look at what they're doing. And all that stuff is highly leverageable. Yeah. But, think about what's really required here. And you mentioned this before, too. It's not just email campaigns. you have to design your whole business around this. You have to have simple, easy to use product. You have to design them that way. You have to design them to be simple and that anybody can pick it up and use it. And the more stuff you throw on there, the less simple it is, right?
Yeah. Right.
So being really crisp about that, and you design it all in as much as you possibly can into the product. And I think that's another barrier for software is that, the dev people and the product people, they're in their own world and they throw it over the wall, and we're not measuring by who cares about that. Customers, that's customer success, that's sales. We're
That's
doing
right.
the cool stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they don't think in terms of we have to design and build our products for those customers, right?
That's right.
And they're not necessarily as focused as they really need to be, or to any extent how it's done in B2C.
This company I just joined, one of the cool things that we do on Friday afternoons is just a demo jam where all the engineers and product guys, show off what they're working on, like live, before it's done, to all of the customer folks and sales folks. And it's a luxury that you can do in a smaller company, right? But it's such a cool way, not only for product and engineering to get that kind of early feedback from the people who are embedded with the customer, but it also just helps make sure that we're designing things and we're building things in a way that are intuitive to the customer. Or maybe if it's built for one or two customers, we know 5 or 6 others who could really benefit from that kind of thing, and it starts to kind of formulate how we message things, and but also call out some obvious areas where it doesn't quite make sense this way, or we should do it another way. And I think it's a really healthy thing to think about, obviously, products from the lens of customer success, because to your point, the best PLG motions are built around a solid product that is just kind of dead simple, right?
Yeah.
I loved your, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say a great lesson. There's you look at Intel, right? Intel, in the early days of Intel, transistors were just still lab projects, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
Andy Grove and all the early leaders at Intel, they talked about, copying McDonald's. They were very specific about that. How do we get from this lab project, very small yield on our devices, to banging these things out by the millions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they made that shift. And a big part of that was just simplicity. Make it simple, make it simple, and design for volume, design for manufacturability and for supportability, right? So that changed their whole mindset about how they design those products. And, again, huge lessons can be learned there, going from the science project, the really cool stuff in the lab, to actually doing it at tremendous scale and making a whole bunch of money doing it, right?
This reminds me of something I saw recently about Ben and Jerry's as well, because they make, I forget the exact number, but it's literally millions of gallons of ice cream a day. But it's still just cream and sugar and chocolate. But part of their process is so automated, and from a supply chain management, and then all the machinery that you need, like there's a ton of automation, but there's still that human element all along the way. Like there's people, literally slicing open a pint and testing it. They really pay close attention to like how big the chunks are, because they're big on big chunks in your ice cream or whatever. So there's these core tenets that still exist, where I think there's a cool parallel to digital customer success, because they've built all this automation and all this sophistication around churning out literally millions of gallons of ice cream a day. However, you're not using your humans to like do it. You're using your humans for quality control. You're using your humans to like, make sure that your machinery isn't just, pumping out a substandard product. The human element is still very much part of that brand, which you see. And it's all that socially conscious, mission-driven stuff that they do. That's all driven by automation. I think that I love that kind of parallel.
Yeah, and they do, I'm sure, like really good, well-run B2C companies. They don't start day one and scale. They go, they do a lot of experimentation, a lot of test marketing, a lot of, hey, we came up with this new thing. Let's do a small run on that, and
Yeah.
see how people respond to it, right? So don't just go from engineering to push it out,
Right.
at scale like that. No, find out what's really going to work, test it, shake it out, and then go scale it. Nail it, then scale it, right?
Same with your digital motions. Like,
Yeah,
test,
test
break
it,
stuff. If it
learn.
doesn't
Yeah,
work, then redo it. Do it a different
yep.
way. A/B
Shake it out,
testing, all
make
that
it
stuff.
better.
Yeah, they
Yep.
were saying they do something like a couple hundred flavors a year, but only like 3 or 4 of them make it to market. So
There you
it's
go, because they're
prime.
testing, and it's better to weed out the bad stuff and stick with the good stuff.
Yep. I loved your Peloton example from earlier because I used to have a Hydro, which is like the rowing version of Peloton.
Mm-hmm.
But they did a really good job of, I'd say, digital customer success, because you would reach certain meter milestones in your rowing, your cumulative rowing. So like I got they just sent me like swag every milestone that came along. So it's like a pair of socks at 50,000 meters or something like that, and a flask, whatever it was. And I think that's such a cool combination also of, there wasn't a human behind any of that. It happened
Right,
automatically, right? But
right.
the real human emotion of receiving something and celebrating those milestones, I think is a huge thing, and also a massive miss for a lot of companies is celebrating the wins. I love to ask this question because it's somewhat vulnerable. So, feel free to plead the fifth, but like, you know, are there like mistakes and blunders that you've learned from, in the past that you carry forward with you, maybe particularly as they relate to customer success or otherwise, but are there things that others can, how can others learn from your mistakes?
Well, I asked my wife, because you'll get the unabridged list of all the mistakes I've made, because it's a
Yep,
long and
right there
impressive
with you.
list of mistakes. You know, I there certainly have been mistakes in my career along the lines. I certainly have made that mistake of which a lot of teams are making right now, is that you're trying to make, there are certain individuals on a customer success team. We're not talking about digital right now, but customer success
Sure.
team, and force them into being salespeople, right?
Yes.
And there are some people that just don't want it. They're not ready for it. They're never going to go there, right? And it's no matter how you want to incentivize or train or whatever, you got to recognize that people are all motivated differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've certainly made that mistake. I think a lot of people are making that mistake right now, and a lot of
Yep.
customer success organizations is, oh yeah, everybody sells, right? Make everybody a salesperson. And I remember one employee I had when I was going down that path. He said, "Look, if I wanted to be a salesperson, I'd be in sales." Right? Like, duh. And it's so simple, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but I think a lot of times the mistakes that people are making by and large are just, hey, we haven't done a good job of quantifying. We don't even know how to show the value of customer success. So let's do the easy thing. Let's just give everybody a quota and let's just go, right?
Yeah.
And everybody's responsible for a number. And if you don't make
Yeah.
your number, you're gone. Okay, that's not going to work in customer success. It's just not. And I think, there is something and special and unique about customer success that's very different from account management. It's very different from, hunter salespeople. And trying to blend them all together, mix them up, I think personally is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one thing. That's a mistake I have made. And that's a mistake that I think a lot of people are making. I would say, in terms of digital in particular, one of the things that I see people do all the time is they are treating symptoms and not root causes. Right.
Sure.
And some of that is because of when we measure behaviors, and we talked about this before, we can correlate. Well, when we see this, we see that. Well, correlation is not causation,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of times we conflate those two. Well, for example, engagement often is linked to renewal probability, right? So higher engagement, higher renewal probability. So what do people do? They try to grow the engagement. But that's not the root cause. That's the symptom.
That's right.
What causes people to be engaged? That's the root cause, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I see a lot of times in digital in particular, because of availability bias, because of what you see is all there is, you tend to just say, well, that's my little world, that's my universe, and therefore I'm going to optimize around what I can see.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem. I see a lot of people making that mistake.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very interesting. I think when it comes to digital and building digital programs, I think you're right. There's a lot of like quote unquote no brainers that you go after. Like, okay, another example would be high support ticket volumes,
Hmm.
right? Sure, you're going to want to flag that account. It's an account to pay attention to. Does that account need an email campaign against it? Yeah, probably not. But do you want to do some root cause analysis to see what it is about that particular account that's causing that high ticket volume? Yeah, probably. And maybe that's the same root cause that's causing 5 other accounts to have a high ticket volume. It's such a big part of digitization is like having the telemetry and the data and the insights necessary so that you can uncover those things that might not otherwise be correlated or obvious within your business.
Exactly. And it goes back to the simple question of why. People do not ask why nearly enough. They know the what and the where and the who and the how, but they don't ask the why. The why is where all the magic happens. When you keep asking why and you come up with it,
Yeah.
that's the path to understand causal relationships,
And 5 whys the shit out of it.
There you go. That's it. That is it.
Oh man, this has been good. Hey, look, as we kind of round down, one of the things that I love to get from everyone is just their content diet. Love to understand what you pay attention to, both for CS, but then just otherwise, like, podcasts, books, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I do what I'm sure what a lot of folks do. I'm on a bunch of mailing lists and I look at LinkedIn just to kind of get a pulse on what's happening in the industry. I do go
Yeah.
to conferences, things like that. That's pretty much, table stakes to keep up with your industry. But for me, I'm kind of weird. I'm kind of a geek. So I read a lot of neuroscientific journals. I read a couple of research papers a week just because I'm fascinated by that. And I think
Yeah.
there's so much that we can do in customer success that scientists are discovering about human behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just applying some of that in customer success. I'm fascinated by that. I've worked with clients to do that and seen some amazing results. So I do read a lot of neuroscientific journals. I also read Medium.
Yeah.
I do a lot of analytics and data science, and they have a lot of good stuff on Medium. People writing about data science, so I read that pretty religiously. So it's really those three. I think that's pretty much my diet of content.
Your diet. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Is there anyone that you'd like to give a shout out or some kudos to that's doing something particularly great in digital?
Without betraying an NDA, I probably can't. So without their permission in advance, I should put it that way. But
Yeah.
I can't say that there's some. I'm working with a client right now, very impressive. I wish I could tell you their name, but they're doing some cool stuff, and it's all back to that what we have just talked about is asking why and experimenting. Right? Don't jump into a commitment. Just try it out, small scale. Do a proof of concept with the technology and just give it a go and see what you can learn from it. And weed out the bad stuff. Don't commit to something that's mediocre. Right.
Pivot quickly.
There's so much out there. There's so much, especially right now in the space, all kinds of technology that you can use for doing digital customer success, all different ways of doing it, all different. It's a smorgasbord of stuff. But don't just pick one and run and just blow it up. Try out a bunch of stuff. Be constantly experimenting and innovating and trying different things and asking why before you commit to anything. I think that is the secret. That really is the secret right there.
Yeah, that's great. That's going to be the title of the show. It's 5 Whys.
Love it.
Finally, where can people find you, reach out to you, learn more about you, all that stuff?
Connect to me on LinkedIn. I do a microblog once a week if you're interested in that. I would also say I have a website. It's at SE stands for Service Excellence -partners.com. So SE-partners.com is my website. And then my email is ed@se-partners.com if you want that.
That's great. Link will be down in the show notes if you want the easy route, the digital route. Ed, it's been a pleasure having you. It's always great talking to you. Thanks so much for carving out the time. And it was awesome having you on the show.
Well, it's been delightful. I always love talking to you, Alex, and I appreciate the invitation.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Digital CX Podcast. If you like what we're doing, consider leaving us a review on your podcast platform of choice. If you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment down below. It really helps us to grow and provide value to a broader audience. You can view the digital customer success definition word map and get more information about the show and some of the other things that we're doing at digitalcustomersuccess.com. This episode was edited by Lifetime Value Media, a media production company founded by our good mutual friend Dylan Young. Lifetime Value aims to serve the content, video, audio production needs of the CS and post-sale community. They're offering services at a steep discount for a limited time, so navigate to lifetimevaluemedia.com, go have a chat with Dylan, and make sure you mention the Digital CX Podcast sent you. I'm Alex Turkovich. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.